Hey everyone, tonight I thought I might make a video on one of my passions. Just gonna be not a real long video, but just about cleaning Abu Ambassadeur 5000 specifically. Just what it takes to clean one. It's not too hard. Normally I'll start. This is a 1961, 1962. It's a 4-screw model. You can see on the left end plate. I'll normally start on this end. Take the 4 screws out. I like using this little, it's really a watch screwdriver made for working on little screws and stuff in a watch, but I like it because the end of it lets it spin in the palm of your hand, less chance of scratching the end plate. Take those 4 screws out, this end plate just comes straight off, just like that. Normally I'll take the cog gear, it's called the cog gear. A screw in the center. Take that screw out. Cog gear slides right off. This one's not real dirty. It's not dirty at all, actually. So we won't need to do anything to that. I'll put it back on. Just make sure it spins free. I usually don't even put any oil or anything on it. It's like a nylon gear, and it spins pretty easily with nothing. They'll last forever. As you can see, that's your original one. It's what, 50 something years, almost 60 years old. Let's see. Next, I like to take the carriage, the line carriage, apart. A little retaining plate there. Just spin it out of the way. Pull out on the gear a little bit. The carriage worm gear. You can usually just screw it right out. Take it out and you're left with this carriage. Normally you could take a Q-tip and run down in the end of it if it's got some stuff in it, but I'll take it apart. Take the end cap off. And inside it is the pawl. It's what's called a pawl. This one's going to be difficult, but there we go. It's just a little directional pawl. It follows on the worm gear. When it gets to the end, it'll rotate inside this carriage right here. It'll rotate in reverse directions, and that's how your line guide runs back and forth. And this one's not real dirty. Sometimes they'll get some grease right in here, and you can just take something and wipe them off. This pawl will wear on the end over time. You'll have to replace it, but it's not a very common thing to have to replace unless you really use it a lot. And you want to make sure on this part. Now let me get back together and I'll show you. It just fits into a slot. right plate, or frame actually. You'll put your worm gear back in. Usually you can kind of screw it in and it'll finally fall into place like that. Put the retainer back on. Maybe. Take the spool out, just get it out of the way. Sometimes you have to. But this has to be seated all the way in. There we go. Now it's seated in where the retainer will fit back on. Make sure it turns, everything looks good. Then you put the end cap back on. There's a little hole in the end cap. I use this dye with real oil. You have to get it from Japan. It's not even sold here in the United States. But it's real thin. It lasts a long time. It lets the parts move easily. There's a little hole in the nut. Worm gear carriage nut. Just squirt a little oil in there because you want the pawl on the inside of this nut here to be able to spin free so it can reverse directions. You'll see it. Get to the end and reverse. And it's got to be able to spin free on the inside there. Okay. Spool. Really not a whole lot to the spool. Make sure there's not a bunch of buildup on the shaft itself with the spool, which this one's clean. And where the brake blocks ride, these are brake blocks. They're centrifugal brake blocks. They slide on this little shaft. You just want to make sure that they slide freely because they ride against, I'll show you, they ride against the brake drum. I'll take it off and show you a little better view of it, but they slide out when you cast, and the centrifugal force forces them out. They rub against the inside of this, and that keeps you from backlashing as bad. Of course, it's still possible, but keeps you from doing it as bad. Go ahead and stick the spool back in here. Make sure the two blocks are in far enough to go inside the brake drum there, I call it. And then we can go ahead and put this end plate back on, and then I'll show you what's involved on the end plate cap. Get these 4 screws back in here. Like I said, this is a 4-screw model. Later on they went to a 3-screw model, which is just a pin. There's no screw there. But this earlier one, like I said, 61, 62, it's the 4-screw model. On the end cap, it just screws off. And there's a felt washer. Kind of keeps oil, it stays saturated in oil. I don't keep mine real oily, but then you got some bearings. They're actually just flat plates, but I call them bearings. The end of the spool shaft rides against these bearings. They actually help center the spool in the frame, but the end of the shaft contacts these bearings, and that's how you tension your spool. To keep it from backlashing, from spinning, you know, just wildly when you cast. You need a little tension on your spool. And this is called the tension knob. And you got two forms of brakes, the tension knob and the little brake blocks that I showed you earlier that ride inside the brake drum. But there's not much to that. Just make sure and keep a little bit of oil in there. It doesn't take very much at all. Once we get it back together, we'll tension that like it needs to be. On the right side plate, just loosen the retaining screws. There's 3 retaining screws. Loosen them. This end comes off. Make sure the blocks stay on there. And they should be to where they fall off, basically, when they're not being held in place by the brake drum here. If you turn this upside down, this should, see how it just falls out. That way you know its centrifugal force can sling it out to where it's doing its job. So they should be loose, but you got to keep up with them. You got to pay attention on where they go and if they fall out, because they will, they should, and they will. Okay, we'll set this right here for now. Now on the right side plate, it's a little more detailed as far as cleaning it. It's more time consuming, I should say. It's not that hard to do. It just takes a little more time. Loosen the handle retaining nut. It comes off, and then it's got a handle retaining screw that's in the end of the main gear. I just keep mine finger tight. No need to crank it down. If you do